And the issue of change, all of us as CEOs and leaders have noticed that there's a resistance to change. But how do you motivate the team to take risks and take risks?
So I would say that any successful business or government needs to have intelligent risk-taking. And the way to do that is to reward people for risk-taking and to take responsibility for it, to encourage it and take responsibility for it. And I'm inspired a little bit, Ambassador, by a story I told you and Ambassador Sukhab a few minutes ago, which is my father, when he died, Hubert Humphrey was vice president. He was my godfather and close friend of my father. And in 1968, he created with my mother an award called the Rivkin Award, given at state every year. And it honors intellectual courage and constructive dissent. So the only award given in the entire U.S. government that honors people for disagreeing with U.S. government bears my family's name. And I'll tell you, well, I'll tell you, it makes a huge difference because people on the ground know policy better than the guys in the ivory tower. And if you listen to them and say, you know, it was well intended, but it's not working. Here's what you need to do to change it. It can make a big difference. And so what's happened is, you know, those guys, the people that win the Rivkin Award, just like the Cobb Awards, they've gone on to much, much higher office, and almost 90% of them eventually reach the, you know, obviously the senior foreign service, but the ambassadorial rank as well, because state encourages it. State wants you to think that way. Other departments wouldn't per se, and maybe it's different in the military, for example, but the State Department is encouraged. So you have to do that in business too. You have to tell people to take intelligent risks, think differently, and not be afraid because you'll support them at the top.
Okay, I think we're ready for the fourth tenet. Stand behind your people.
Well, that's actually a good segue to that, which is to stand behind people because, all right, so here's what I'd say about this, Ambassador. Look, I'll give you an extreme example of what it means to stand by your people. And I don't recommend you try this at home or that you do this in your businesses, but I did. As a political appointee, the ambassadors here know that there's no difference when you're an ambassador between being a political appointee and a career appointee. You're still the ambassador. It's about which path you chose to get there. But sometimes people can have biases. And the relationship with the U.S. military was very important to me, and it has been my whole life. But in a Democratic administration, a guy from the entertainment industry coming in, you know, it's unclear whether the military would say that the guy knows, you know, the guy stands by us. But I always told him I did. There's 11 military cemeteries in France. There's more Americans buried in France than any nation on earth except America because of the sacrifice that we made during World Wars I and II. And so when my defense attaché, you know, every arm was represented of the U.S. government, he came in and he goes, Ambassador, I want you to be the first person to jump out of an airplane at 14,000 feet with the U.S. Army's Golden Knights. I'm terrified of heights, but I wanted to live by my creed, and I said, if it will support the military, I'm going to do it. I get up there, I'm with the Knights, so it was the same thing that Bush 41 jumped with. It was the same guys.
As did Sue Cobb.
Yep.
She jumped with the
When you were an
Golden Knights,
ambassador,
too.
did you do it too?
No, I
Well-
was 70, it was like 3 years ago. I was 82.
Well, that is extremely impressive, and because I was not.
That's after
82.
she climbed Mount Everest.
Right. For me, it was a terrifying experience. But you walk off the back of the plane, you flip upside down, and you're flying. But it was amazing. I landed in front of 25,000 people, and in 20-mile-an-hour winds, and I did a live interview on French television talking about what it means for America in D-Day. It was the 68th anniversary of D-Day. And in the audience that day was a guy named Ray Mabus, who was the Secretary of the Navy. And Mabus said, oh, you think that's something, but let's see you fly on an F-18 Super Hornet. And I said, well, sir, you know, I have to get water trained. He goes, no, I'll just waive the training. And I go, well, if you have waived the training, why do you even have training? He goes, because when you take off, your chance of falling down is right when you take off and right when you land. And if you do, you're going to flip over, hit the water, you're going to die. So it doesn't matter if you're trained, you know. But I did it for my naval guys. And we did supersonic travel, wing-to-wing, mid-air refueling, formation of wing-to-wing. And we're flying up there, and I said to the pilot in the front, did you guys see Top Gun Maverick? Anybody here? So those are F-18 Super Hornets, right? And the guy Bob in the film in the back, and that's where I sat, Bob. So I wasn't flying, I was the guy in the back. But you're strapped in, you're wearing a flight suit, you can't move, and they say to you before you take off, whatever you do, don't push that button because that button will pop off the canopy when you don't want that to happen at altitude. And whatever you do, don't push that button because that'll dump our fuel out of the plane. If you do that, you're not going to like it. And definitely don't push this button, which is the ejector seat. Yeah. And so I was frozen in that plane, but we did 8 Gs, and so I said to the pilot, I'm sorry, real quick finish on the story, Ambassador, but I said to the pilot, if you like flying so much, I said over the intercom, why didn't you join the Air Force? Yeah, those are fighting words for a naval aviator. So I didn't know that, I guess, but I was making conversation stupidly in the middle of a flight. But he didn't answer me, but all of a sudden he went, poof, and he shot straight up into the sky. And you realize these planes aren't planes, they're controlled rocket ships, right? And then it did what's a loop upside down, and then it flew upside down where your canopy's touching the clouds, above the clouds, and then he rights himself. And he goes, "That answer your question?" And I said, "No, sir, I'm sorry, I didn't answer my question." And he goes, "Because what you just did, with me, if we had done over land, it would have violated 7 states' laws, and we'd be in jail. If you want to fly, Mr. Ambassador, you're a naval aviator." And but anyway, when I landed, and the point I'm trying to say by the story, not a long-winded story here, is my defense attaché could not have been happier. And he couldn't believe his eyes. And what he did was he went on a bragging rights tour across the entire European theater and said, "Well, your ambassador hasn't flown in a Hornet, and your ambassador hasn't jumped out of a plane." They were so grateful that they secretly, every year on the 4th of July, Lafayette's tomb has a flag on it in Paris, and the ambassador changes the flag and retires it and puts a new flag out. Well, my naval defense attaché took that flag and flew it on 13 different cemeteries that I spoke on, or boats or whatever. Every time I spoke, I didn't realize it, but that little flag was flying on a giant mast behind me. They then put it in a letterbox and with all the names of the places I went and presented it to me when I left as a gift of appreciation, and which my wife has me have in the office because it's not, it's meaningful to me, but not great in our house. But still, it's an amazing, amazing thing. And you know what? From that moment forward, my military cooperation couldn't have been better. I was one of them. And so I'm just saying that
and you got an award from the Navy.
I did. I was given an award from the Navy for doing that. But I guess the last thing I'll say about this is you have to lead by example, and you have to stand by your team, because the worst thing a leader can do, in my mind, is point fingers. You know what? You're chairman of the board and CEO of a company. Are you going to go in and say, "Well, we failed because that employee that I have really screwed up"? No, you screwed up. And you take the heat for the employee, and you show them that you stand by them, and they will be not only loyal to you, but they'll be willing to take intelligent risks going forward. And I think that those actions really do speak louder than words. And it's important to live that as a leader of an organization.
Totally agree.